I'm really delighted to welcome Fiona Macdonald back. She came while we had the Centre Sustainable Care Programme, and it's lovely to see her again. Really excited about this presentation. So for those who don't know, Fiona is the Policy Director at the Centre for Future Work, which is part of a research policy and policy think tank, the Australia Institute. She's also an adjunct principal research fellow in the College of Business and Law at RMIT University in Melbourne. Her research expertise looks at work and care and the paid care workforce. And she's when she came last time, she spoke about the gig economy and the emerging sort of Uberization of care that's emerging in Australia and elsewhere. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Fiona now to present.
Great, thank you, Kate. I'm really privileged to be here again. It's lovely to see you all. I'll just share my screen. All right, as I said, thank you, Kate. I'm really pleased to be here. First, I would like to acknowledge, as is our custom, the traditional owners of the land from which I am speaking and on which I work, and those are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, which is traditionally named Narn by the local Wurundjeri people. As I said, it's great to be back here and contributing to the work of the centre again. And I'm sorry I won't be over there for the national conference, for the international conference this year, but I'll be looking forward to hearing all about that. As Kate said, I'm with the Centre for Future Work. I'll just explain that is a research centre housed within the Australia Institute, which is our purpose is to conduct and publish progressive economic research on work and employment and labour markets. That's the Centre for Future Work's aim. The Australia Institute, more broadly, is an independent public policy think tank. It's based on donations from philanthropic trusts, and it has a broader brief around economic inequality that my work contributes to. And my presentation today draws on work that you've probably heard a bit about before, and that was work that most of which I undertook at RMIT, but I have continued doing that work, which has looked at the changing nature of paid care work in long-term care systems in Australia. And tonight I'm going to, and I have approached that research from the perspective of how do we create better work to support social justice and equality through the lens of social care and support workers. This morning in your time, I'm going to focus on that part of my research that's examined how digital platforms have grown into the NDIS and aged care markets in Australia and what that means. I think we know a lot more about it. We're learning a lot about this phenomenon currently and in the last couple of years than we have known before. However, at the same time, while the rapid growth of digital platform or gig work has generated enormous discussion about its broader implications for workers and beyond, in Australia as elsewhere, the focus of attention has mainly been on the more visible forms of platform work, such as food delivery and transport or rideshare work, and on remote online crowd work. Until recently, there's been little attention on women's experience of this work and on the growing phenomenon of platform-mediated care and support work undertaken in the private settings of other people's homes. So home care and disability support work in homes. In Australia, the range of the intervention of digital care platforms has probably having its greatest impacts on the feminised and low-paid long-term care workforce, providing support and care to people with disability and older people. Like digital care platforms in other industries, these labour platforms provide the digital infrastructure for buyers and sellers of labour to connect with each other. Workers post their profiles and availability on the platforms via an app, and people requiring personal care and support choose the workers they prefer and request their services. Workers are constituted as self-employed independent contractors, ostensibly engaged by individual care and support clients or consumers. Platforms in this industry they merely provide marketplaces and are not employers. They're sometimes referred to as horizontal platforms, and the idea is that these are different from vertical platforms that have a lot of control over workers, such as the rideshare platforms and food delivery platforms. I would maintain from my research and from my reviews of the research that's out there that this is actually not the case. This is not how platforms work. They do actually exert quite a deal of control over workers, and they have an influence over the care and support relationships, and they have implications for people who purchase and receive care and support. So there does still, though, remain a dearth of information about the nature of risks inherent in this work and its influences. And there's been pretty limited public discussion that actually crosses over from the workplace relations side to the thinking about care and support policy and personalised support and care, and that actually engages with what this work and what this form of engagement of workers means in terms of how we might deal with some of the problems of it. Okay, so I'm sure many of you are aware, and I think some of you online are actually in Australia, so bear with me. I'll give you a little bit of a rundown on the long-term care and support system in Australia. But first, I'd like to just say that the growth of digital platforms in publicly funded long-term care and support systems in individualised consumer care markets has been noted and is becoming an established part of systems in US, in many countries across the EU and in Australia. And I'm not sure about the extent to which it is in the UK. I know that there are providers there. I know some of you have done some work on it, but I'm not quite sure how big, how big they are. Okay, so paid care and support work in Australia. First of all, it's not that unlike in terms of workforce. The situation in the UK, where 4 out of 5 of every care worker or support worker is a woman, and providing personal care and support to people with disability and the aged in home care. Many workers are low paid work. There's a lot of insecure work. Work is very part-time hours, a lot of casual work, fragmented working time. So fairly poor working conditions, and workforce shortages are a really big issue, and high turnover is a really big issue. One of the main differences that we probably have in Australia is we don't yet have the extent of migrant workers in this sector, as might be the case in the UK and in many European countries. There's widespread and increasingly widespread in policy areas, and in the government has had some made some key policy interventions since the Labor government was elected a year ago, yesterday, I think, around revaluing recognition of the undervaluation of feminised care and support work, which is actually really good. We're still to see how these reforms play out, but the recognition of gendered undervaluation of this work is something that there's been a lot of debate and discussion about, and it's become sort of recognised and acknowledged and accepted, which is really good. Okay, so to the platforms. Horizontal marketplaces, that's how the digital platforms work characterised by, in some policy documents and by themselves in the long-term care and support markets in Australia that I would question. They also proponents of platform workers seek to present the use of technology as the innovation and the source of profit, and I would question that. And often they also present the workers who work through digital platforms as entrepreneurs, as typical, and I would question that too. So how do they work? They intermediate work relationships, including, well, there are a number of different models. The one that's most common in the long-term care and support system is, well, all models take their money by taking fees from workers and also sometimes from consumers or clients. They generally take most of their fee from workers, where a worker's pay is based on labour time, which is a difference between these platforms and the other on-demand platforms where it's based on the task. The hourly rate of pay is usually agreed on a care platform between the client and the worker, rather than set by the platform, and that's where the platform's claim to marketplace comes in. Nevertheless, while not all platforms, that determine final pay rates, platforms do place very strong constraints on pay, and they strongly influence rates, and some of them do actually set rates. They use algorithms and consumer ratings to filter and rank worker profiles, controlling which workers have an opportunity to be considered for a job and constraining worker behaviour. Rating systems operate as systems for disciplining workers. A poor rating from a consumer, regardless of whether it's a fair rating, can cause a worker to lose future work opportunities or compel them to put up with unfair treatment. Platforms intermediate work relationships, including processing all payments between clients and workers on an ongoing basis. Workers, as I said, they're treated as independent contractors who are engaged by the person to whom they're providing care or support services. Platforms take ongoing commissions for each hour of labour, taking most money from workers, as I've said. And that is also why I would question that they are merely matching marketplaces, because they're involved in the relationship on an ongoing basis. They do undertake basic screening of workers, and as I said, they filter and rank workers to determine visibility of personal profiles, so it matters to the worker what the platform thinks of them, and personal profiles are extremely important to workers. They spend a lot of time fixing their personal profiles to try to get more work. So that because the algorithms are used to direct people to seek care from particular workers, algorithms are used to advertise particular pay rates in different locations. So there's a lot of involvement in the background that you don't see, a lot of invisible work that the platform does to manage who gets work, when they get work, how much they get work for. And they do differ from other digital labour platforms in that they encourage workers to provide a great deal of personal information on their online profiles and to portray themselves to potential clients in ways that establish their trustworthiness. This information is also used to classify and classify workers, which has implications for controlling their behaviour and creates potential for discrimination and reproduction of inequalities on the basis of gender, race and class. So I'm good. Platforms require workers to use their apps to communicate with clients, to log on and off from care clients, to provide mandatory care reports. And sorry, I'm trying to spare you some of my overly enthusiastic detail. Yeah, so the most prominent platforms in the publicly funded care and support markets in Australia are not accountable for workers' performance or for the quality or safety of the care and support organised via their platform. They are not responsible in any way for workers' safety or for workers' working conditions in their jobs. How they make their money, technological innovation is not particularly the source of profit or the basis for the business basis of digital platform models. They can, through investment of an enormous amount of money, develop effective networks, and that is the aim of this business model, to develop a network that gives you a dominance in the market, and then you up your price. That's how I think, that's how Uber had worked. Initially, you start with lower prices, and you can up your prices once you've got more market power. It's a little bit different here because what we're dealing with is publicly funded care and support, although they do market themselves particularly towards those people who are cheapest to support, the least complex, and potentially can supplement their public funding. So, as with other digital labour platforms, they exploit the gaps in legal frameworks for workers' rights and entitlements that are built around the employment relationship. While their relationship with workers is ambiguous, platforms exert significant control over them, and they benefit the way they operate benefits the platform business owners in the same way as outsourcing to home-based workers has benefited business owners in the past. Business owners benefit by avoiding legal regulation and reducing labour costs, minimising capital investment, avoiding costs of supervising the work, avoiding worker collective action, and shifting the risks of fluctuation in demand to workers. The role the technology plays is, as I said, in enabling them to connect people seeking care and support with workers in a local area while maintaining business operations across vast geographic locations and multiple local labour markets. The platform provides a remote portal. The workers and the consumers do most of the work associated with advertising job vacancies, making contacts, booking jobs, logging or approving work hours, and rating workers. There's not a lot of labour at the platform's end in that. The technology enables automated processing of payments. Algorithms are applied to all the information collected to sort profiles. And it enables the platform to discipline workers while taking little or no responsibility for how care and support is undertaken or received. So it's too short a time to go into the finances of it here, but platforms do maintain that they pay workers more than they could receive otherwise. The evidence just shows that is not the case for most workers once you do the maths on what else workers miss out on in terms of benefits they would receive as an employee, including immediate, financial entitlements. The idea that we need to have this model as in terms of its financial benefits, being able to provide care and support cheaper, it doesn't stand up on the basis of the business case. There's one platform in Australia that actually employs its workers directly as employees, but still operates in a similar way, where people seeking a care and support worker connect with the worker via the platform and have control over, can choose who they want to work with them, and can negotiate hours, working times with that person. So it's not necessary that platforms need to engage workers as ostensible self-employed contractors who bear all the risk of the relationship. Okay, so in Australia, how many workers are on care platforms? Well, there are actually very few. It's very difficult. There are few official labour market statistics don't provide good estimates. I think national statistics organisations are getting their act together in terms of developing the survey tools to find out how many platform workers we actually do have. And there have been some big surveys across Europe. It's really not known. We still don't know. Employment statistics generally focus on a person's main job, which is difficult when a worker holds a number of jobs, so there really are no reliable estimates. The estimate that's quoted most generally in Australia actually comes from one of the platforms itself, that suggests that this is only not a large number of workers. However, the issue that we have is how the platforms are actually changing the market, which suggests that there will be many, many more workers on platforms in the future. Often the idea that platforms are a problem is dismissed because there's the argument that most workers are part-time or casual and only doing short hours part-time work, as you know. I think some people refer to it as side hustle or supplementary, for supplementary income. The evidence that that's the case in the care and support work in Australia is not strong. The issue is that the work is so part-time anyway, that many, many workers have multiple jobs. And so many workers are not full-time workers, and even with multiple jobs, they're still part-time workers. So if you ask workers if they're doing it for extra income, generally there may be a high proportion of workers who say they do, but if you ask them if they're doing this work for essential income, there's also a high proportion who say they do. So as care and support workers are nearly twice as likely as other workers to hold multiple jobs, it's difficult to argue that this work is supplementary for non-essential income. Flexibility is often cited as a motivation for workers working on platforms, and survey results suggest it's important for platform workers in Australia. Still, it's not clear that they're choosing platform work in preference to other employment options, as perceived greater flexibility is also cited as a motivation and source of job satisfaction for workers hired as waged employees in this industry. So it's an area that we don't know enough about. Is it entrepreneurial? Are they entrepreneurial workers who choose to do this work? We do know that the evidence that we have suggests that workers on care platforms are more likely to be younger, from non-English speaking background or migrant workers, than the overall workforce, which doesn't necessarily fit with that. Their profile tends to fit with more vulnerable workers. They are still mostly female too. For both care consumers and workers, individual self-management of support and care can create benefits and risks. And while the aim of individualised, personalised system is to transfer greater control and responsibility to the person who is being supported, who requires support and care, this transfer of risk is also a transfer of risk and responsibility to care workers. And this has particular implications for workers on platforms. Unlike employees, most workers carry this responsibility and negotiate and manage the complexities of ongoing care work and relationships without organisational guidance. Without organisational accountability and without organisational support. But unlike truly independent self-employed workers, most platform workers are monitored and disciplined by a third party, the platform, in this work. However, the platform's not accountable to the worker for ensuring fairness or accuracy in these processes, and distances itself from the liability for the quality of service provision. Care workers on platforms can be at far greater risk of losing future work if a relationship with a client turns out is not going well, as a client who's even somewhat dissatisfied, or if a client submits a false or unfair evaluation. These client ratings are shown on the care platform and are used by automating ranking systems to determine if this worker's profile appears and if they'll get another job. So there's a real lack of transparency in the algorithmic management practices that the platforms use. And there's also a potential for misuse of workers' data. Workers that I interviewed in the course of my research report fear of getting, and this is echoed in other people's research, fear of getting a poor rating or desire to get a good rating often leads them to do extra unpaid work for clients, to accept clients' requests to renegotiate lower rates, which was a really frequent thing among the workers that I interviewed, and to tolerate poor or unacceptable behaviour or work demands. Because workers just didn't feel it was easy to leave a client, because then they wouldn't be able to use the platform. Despite the relational nature of care and support work, the platforms don't offer workers the opportunity to rate clients, and they don't necessarily, some of them maintain they offer dispute resolution, but it's the client they don't generally take a role in any kind of dispute resolution. So the worker has to just live with whatever a problem might be. So it's highly precarious employment. Workers have no access to paid leave or minimum employment entitlements and standards. They don't receive superannuation, which is our retirement payments, normally paid by an employer. Platform workers have no income security or severance rights. They're not covered by workers' compensation in the event of injury. Like on other on-location platform workers in other industries, they're subject to being disciplined, as I talked about, and to various mechanisms of control. So they can be vulnerable to exploitation and unfair treatment. Like many other workers in personalised support and care systems and in home care, they perform their work in isolation in environments known to carry fairly high health and safety risks for workers. However, they're without any peer or organisational support, have few development opportunities, and are responsible for their own training. To talk a little bit more in detail about the pay, platforms, in addition to having set rates, some of them have set rates, some of them just seek to influence or indirectly set rates. So some platforms that say that they don't have any influence over what a worker will charge actually publishes advice to work on typical or average hourly rates, which they publish those, and then they'll provide scenarios on their website that an example suggesting much lower rates are the acceptable rates or preferable rates. And as well, as I said, they'll insist, and it's kind of too complicated to go into here, but they'll insist that most workers are paid higher, but they're actually not, and detailed comparisons of hourly pay rates, taking into account the loss of employee entitlements and benefits, and accounting, even without accounting for business costs, show that workers are not being paid what are the minimum regulated industrial award rates, which are our industry-based safety net rates. Independent contractors are responsible for their own training and development, as I've said. In Australia, they have obligations to maintain capabilities and skills and ensure certifications are current. They don't have, there is no qualification, mandatory qualification, but there are a lot of smaller certifications that workers are expected to have for different types of support and care. And all the fees, costs, time associated with these are the workers. Some platforms maintain they offer training and support, but what they actually offer is access to whatever free online modules the platforms can get hold of themselves. In relation to working time, digital platforms include, like other digital platforms, care and support platforms organise and control the labour process in ways that blur the boundaries between working hours and free non-work time. So on care platforms, this happens in a number of different ways. Workers spend a lot of unpaid time engaged in various tasks involved in looking for jobs, applying for jobs, attending job interviews with prospective clients, including interviews. And I was amazed again at the workers that I interviewed, how many of them had attended interviews, and this was some of them were in person, not online interviews, but for one-off jobs of only a few hours duration. They had taken several hours out to attend an interview. And of course, the work of updating profiles to improve visibility, which is so essential to keeping work. Workers also spend unpaid time on administrative work, such as logging working hours. As platforms have started to pay more attention to care and support safeguarding, workers are being asked to devote more time to writing reports required by platforms, and in some cases completing online training models that platforms are starting to require or request that they do, again, in their own time. One aspect of support work that's reported by many workers on platforms is devoting time to being constantly available to their clients, and platforms are tracking that. They're tracking the amount of time that care workers spend communicating with clients. Employee workers, from my research over quite a few years, employee workers have far greater capacity to place limits or buffers around their work time and availability than platform workers do, and to better protect this non-work time. They have backup, they have support from supervisors, they have support from peers. Platform workers are just not able to protect their own non-work time, and a part of this is that they're not able often to, they have the absolute lack of support they have outside any support that they may have from their client who they're providing support and care to. They are really often without any support resources, and seek support from peer communities where they get all sorts of reliable and unreliable and assorted advice, seek support from family members, seek support from family doctors, but spend a lot of time trying to resolve problems because of their isolation that they face. Again, availability. They face pressure to be available when people want or need them in order to maintain good relationships and good ratings. They often report negotiating, again, it's a working time thing, having times renegotiated endlessly. They spend a lot of time with clients seeking to renegotiate time or vary times unpredictably and with little notice. And in the Australian system, particularly the NDIS, the culture and the sense that workers have, the ideas that workers have about what it is to do a good job, is about being flexible, being amenable to changing requirements of choice and control, doing what people want, doing it when they want, doing it how they want. And so younger, and I think in terms of, again, my research and others, I don't think there's not enough information about the workforce to really know this, but my experience and knowledge of the workforce suggests that there are two groups of workers. those who are very experienced and skilled and who gained their skills and experience through training and employment in public systems or in not-for-profit organisations, and who now do this work because they can have autonomy and choose when they do it and feel very competent, choose their clients. And then they're at the other end of the spectrum, there are a lot. And if you look at the platform's websites, you can see very, very many very inexperienced workers, possibly with no experience, very workers with perhaps no qualifications at all, workers who really come asking very, very low rates. And these workers, I think, are quite vulnerable to some of these risks I'm talking about. I think the more experienced workers are much less vulnerable to those risks and probably can use platforms to support their working preferences, and it probably works well for them. Which takes me to, I think, the issues of discrimination and inequality. And this shows up in the international literature, also on care and support platforms. And I've tried to separate out digital labour platforms that provide that are domestic work platforms for privately funded domestic workers from those that are supporting workers in publicly funded care and support systems, just because I think there are some different policy responses required. But I think these issues go to workers in publicly funded systems. With care and support platforms, as I said, they require lots of information from people. They have photos, personal details, age, gender, ethnicity, biographies, statements about personal leisure and lifestyle interests, self-assessments of your personality and your qualities, whether you've got access to private transport, any references, certifications or qualifications. So workers do, as I've mentioned, compete with each other to constructing images and personal narratives that would make them attractive to consumers or clients. And the consumers are encouraged by platforms to seek out workers with similar values and interests. So arising from these practices for workers are the reliance on and the reinforcement of gendered, cultural and racialised stereotypes of good care and support workers. And that, it facilitates discrimination as being the findings generally of people who have looked at this. I saw this in my work, and I think some of the work in a couple of European studies have seen this. The work in Spain has demonstrated some of this, these problems. I think moreover, there's a fundamental imbalance of information for workers, as workers have far less access to information about consumers than consumers have about them. While they provide all this detailed information, they're rarely provided with the same detail. They have very limited information about their work environment and its safety. And so there are real issues of discrimination and inequality. While it's been suggested that platform work can assist some professionally trained migrant care workers who face labour market barriers to enter their chosen fields, now, some of that, particularly, I think there was some work in Canada that looked at that, and I'm sorry, I don't remember whose work that was. But again, it makes sense with the experience of, it echoes the experience that of the workers that I spoke to. It can support people into the labour market, albeit not in the role that they trained for. However, workers still experience that discrimination and inequality, and the evidence is that they can get still very trapped in low-paid care and support work. It's in formal labour markets such as Australia's. It's not that these workers would be locked out completely otherwise. So it's much less protected and far more precarious than other low-paid care employment, and workers are isolated from peers and from opportunities for collective organisation. So it's more, the evidence suggests to me it's more likely that platforms entrench existing inequalities, reproducing current cultural prejudices and stereotypes, and reinforcing precariousness. The argument that it supports gender equality through supporting women's labour force participation by offering flexible work that women can have more control over the working time of. I think, this is in the platform literature. Some of the digital platform literature makes very little distinction between different kinds of work, and you have to really sift out whether they're talking about home-based crowd work or not. But there are claims still made about platform work for gender equality, care and support platform work for gender equality, providing options for women so that they continue to provide paid work, combine paid work with unpaid care, by determining their working times and having working hours and having control over their working times. However, it's not all that clear that digital platform work provides that much worker-friendly flexibility. You can, yes, find work that suits your hours, but that's only going to be if you are only looking for short hours work. You can fit in, if you can only work on Friday afternoons, yes, you could probably find some work on Friday afternoon. So if you're a worker who only wants a few hours of work a week, this may work for you in terms of flexibility that work with a service provider may not. However, it shouldn't require that you be engaged as an independent contractor and not have the same benefits and entitlements as other people. So I suppose I'm saying flexibility shouldn't be seen as a benefit if you're correspondingly denied protections, and that flexibility of short-time part hours work is something that many workers in care work who are seeking some kind of flexibility think of as positive, but they also spend most of their time looking for other work in the Australian care and support workforces, where there is a high level of underemployment, as I said. So I think that gender inequality is likely to increase if platform work and independent contracting grows in the care sectors. In Australia, there is an enormous policy shift towards addressing undervaluation of care work in long-term care sectors, as well as in early childhood education and care. But these efforts will completely bypass these workers. It's already the case that one of the ways that platforms profit is by not paying for workers' entitlements and benefits. So if there is a set government fee, they can take more of that than can a provider that provides training, support, supervision for a worker and pays them employment entitlements and benefits. So increased wages to address undervaluation in these sectors won't necessarily mean that anything happens for these particular workers. Okay, so sorry, I'm trying to skip through too much stuff here. So I think, it's ultimately, if we think about what do these platforms offer, innovative business and service models, I don't think they offer, but this is my assessment. It'd be really interesting to hear what others have to say. You may have very different perspectives, and I have looked at it only from the worker perspective. Innovative service models for personalised support and care, I am not convinced that they need to depend on independent contractors in precarious work. And I think my frustration is that we don't actually, that we say, well, platforms offer these benefits, rather than looking at, well, how would you get these benefits? How would you get the benefits of a platform without having a precarious workforce? And as I've already said, I think that much of the innovation is in avoiding the costs and responsibilities of legal regulation. Do they provide workers with more flexible work? As I discussed that a bit, yes, but there are certain assumptions about if every worker is only looking for a little bit of work, that's fine, but that's not the case for workers. And endless surveys saying workers are only looking for second jobs they're kind of meaningless unless you start looking at the care and support workforce, not at what a second job means in the entire labour market. Do they provide better value for money? They do provide cheaper care by the hour, some of them. Whether that's better, who that's better value for money for, ultimately, it's not better value for money for the system, for care systems, where what is undermined is the benefits for system sustainability, the costs and benefits of system sustainability that goes to, other than the platforms, that go to the individual workers, that go to other providers who actually do compete directly with platforms in many segments of the market in Australia. They may provide, somebody may get a few more hours out of a self-managed support package because they get cheaper care and support per hour, but the risks that I didn't talk about a great deal about, but the risks that come with workers' lack of experience, lack of training, lack of organisational support and peer support and oversight are risks to people they're supporting. People being supported may choose to bear those risks, but if something does go wrong, there are actually risks for workers in terms of their liability. And is it informalised? Is it possible that platforms can formalise informal work, which has been a claim made in countries where there's very little formal care and support work, and it's grey markets of household, of workers providing support in informal arrangements. There's nothing in any of this. It brings some of these workers into a place where they're more visible, but they're not more visible to regulation. They're not more visible to anything other than, in the context of the platform's role and the platform. There's nothing that suggests that this work gets formalised. They may put all their information up on a platform. It doesn't formalise the work in any way. It still sits within a kind of informalised market, and that's I think that's an issue in Australia, and where we have a regulated labour market, as it is in places where there is less formal care work, because it is actually informalising work that has been formal. So how do you fix it? I'll save that for another day, because I think that depends very much on the point that I've made a couple of times. It's not going to be fixed by industrial relations regulation alone. It needs to actually be built into thinking about how we have good personalised care and support systems that aren't built on precarious work. Thank you.